What if the gnarled, half-forgotten tree at the bottom of your garden, the one dropping fruit into the grass that nobody bothers to pick, is worth more than every tree you planted on purpose? 10 of these overlooked old apple trees carry real value. Some have turned out to be the last surviving example of a variety, and one of them is the single most planted apple in America. Here is the truth most people never hear. A tree being old does not make it valuable. Millions of apple trees get sold every year, and most of them are worth $30 or $40, and that is a fair price. Nobody ever taught you to look at the trunk. Value does not live in the fruit. It lives in the graft, the record, and whether the tree is something nobody can buy. Go and look at it before you take a saw to it. 10. The apple that matches nothing in the shops. Somewhere at the end of an old garden, there is a tree dropping fruit that looks like nothing you have ever bought. Small, maybe, ribbed down the sides, a strange russet skin like fine sandpaper, or a red so dark it reads almost purple in October. You have probably assumed it is just a bad apple tree. That instinct makes sense. Pick one up and look at it properly. Here is what nobody told you. There were once thousands of named apple varieties, grown across America and Britain, bred for keeping, for cider, for a particular county's soil. Most of them vanished when commercial orchards standardized on a handful. But they did not vanish everywhere. They survived in gardens, on farm boundaries, behind houses, on trees nobody replaced because nobody was paying attention. There are people who hunt these professionally. Apple detectives, identification services, DNA matching against reference collections, all of it existing for one reason. Because trees like yours are still out there, and some of them are the last of their kind. Here is your test tonight. Take one fruit and write down 4 things: the color and any ribbing, the month it ripens, whether it stays firm in a cool shed for weeks or goes soft in days, and the taste, sharp or sweet or nutty. Those 4 together are how identification actually starts. And the loss I see most often. A tree comes down for firewood because it was leaning over a fence, and a variety that had one surviving example goes into the log pile with it. 9. The apple that tastes wrong. Somewhere there is a tree loaded with fruit every autumn that nobody eats. You tried one once. It was sharp enough to make your jaw ache, or dry and bitter in a way that coated your mouth and stayed there. So you wrote the tree off. Bad apples. Probably a wild seedling. No one faults you for that. Bite one again in October. And pay attention to which unpleasant it is. Here is what the taste is actually telling you. That dry, mouth-drying bitterness is tannin, and tannin is not a flaw. It is the single thing cider makers cannot buy in a supermarket apple. The traditional cider varieties, the bitter sweets and bitter sharps, were bred specifically for it, because tannin is what gives cider structure, instead of tasting like sour juice. Craft cider makers hunt for these trees, and some of them pay for fruit off old garden trees by the crate. And if it is sourness rather than bitterness, that is a cooking apple bred to hold its shape and its acidity through heat. Also not a flaw. Also a job. Your test tonight. Bite one and hold it. Sour makes you wince and passes. Tannin dries the inside of your mouth and lingers after you swallow. That drying feeling is the valuable one, and the loss. Every year, somebody grafts over a perfectly good cider tree, or takes it out entirely because the fruit was inedible off the branch. It was never meant to be eaten off the branch. 8. The tree that came with paperwork. Somewhere on an old trunk, there may be a strip of metal, or a rusted stub of one, or a length of wire the bark has swallowed as the tree thickened around it. And somewhere in the house papers, there may be a nursery invoice, A planting note, a line in a deed, a date written on the back of a photograph. Most people threw those out years ago. They were untidy, and they did not look like anything. Here is why that matters more than the fruit. Two identical trees, same variety, same age, same crop, do not carry the same value if one of them can be documented and the other cannot. A tree with a nursery, a planting year, and a variety name attached has a record behind it, and heritage collections and specialist growers pay attention to the record because it lets them place the tree in a history. An anonymous old tree is a puzzle. A documented one is evidence. Your test tonight: go to the trunk with a torch and look through the old bark for wire, metal, or plastic. Follow any wire because the tag is usually still on the end of it, buried under moss. Then go inside and look through whatever papers came with the house. A nursery name and a year on a scrap of paper is worth more than the whole crop and the loss I watch constantly. Somebody clears out an inherited house, bins a box of old receipts, and turns a documented tree into an anonymous one in an afternoon. 7. And this is where I have to slow you down, because it is the most expensive assumption in this whole video. You see a variety described as heirloom, or antique, or a lost variety, rediscovered. Your heart lifts because those words sound like they mean something specific. Here is the honest truth, and I respect you too much to dress it up. Not one of those words is regulated. There is no standard a nursery has to meet before printing heirloom on a label. It generally implies something grown before the middle of the 20th century, but nobody is checking, and it gets applied to trees that were grafted 18 months ago onto modern rootstock in a commercial field. Here is why that costs people money. Anything genuinely desirable gets propagated fast. Grafting is straightforward, and it scales. A variety that specialist nurseries carried at a premium 10 years ago in tiny numbers is now on a trolley outside a garden center every spring for $30. It is exactly the same variety. There are just 50,000 of them. I know some of you paid collector prices for something that is now stacked beside the bare root strawberries. I am not going to tell you the market is coming back to meet you, because I do not think it is. There is still a test worth doing. Search the exact variety name and see what ordinary nurseries are charging this season, not what an article from 2014 said. It once fetched. Rare is not a property of your tree. It is a property of the market, and the market moved. But before we get to the top 5, there is something about all of this that most people never stop to realize. The trees that turn out to matter almost never look impressive. They look neglected, lichened down the north side, a limb propped up with a fence post, moss in the crotch, the whole thing leaning at an angle that makes people nervous. Nobody has pruned it in 30 years, and nobody has sprayed it. That is exactly what a surviving old apple tree looks like in a real garden. Appearance keeps lying to people. What decides value is a small set of signals. What the trunk shows, what the record says, whether the thing is something you cannot buy. Those are learnable, and once you see them, you cannot stop seeing them. Now let us get back to the rankings. 6. The knuckle low on the trunk. Almost every named apple tree in the world is a graft. A variety on top, a rootstock underneath, joined at a swollen collar somewhere in the bottom foot of the trunk. Apples do not come true from seed, so this is the only way a named variety exists at all. But grafted trees have a failure mode nobody warns you about. If the top is killed or broken low, the rootstock survives and throws its own growth, and what you get afterward is not your variety. It is the understock, vigorous, thorny, small, hard fruit that tastes of very little. Your test tonight: clear the grass and moss from the base and feel for a swollen collar where the bark changes character. Then check whether the main growth rises from above that collar or below it. Below it, and your tree has quietly become a different tree. 5. The tree nobody grafted. Sometimes you clear the base and there is no collar at all. The trunk simply rises out of the ground, one continuous piece of wood, no join, no change in the bark. That tree grew from a pip. Somebody threw a core into the hedge 60 years ago, or a horse did the job, and something came up and nobody stopped it. Here is what that means, and it is stranger than most people expect. Apples do not come true from seed. Plant a pip from the best apple you ever ate, and what grows is not that apple. It is a genuinely new variety, a one-off cross between that tree and whatever pollen reached it, and no other tree on earth is the same thing. Most seedlings are poor, small, sour, barely worth picking. That is why orchards graft. But every famous apple in existence started exactly this way. A chance seedling on a farm boundary that somebody noticed and propagated. That is how the whole system works. And it is still how it works. Your test tonight. Confirm there is no graft collar, then judge the fruit honestly. Does it keep in a cool shed into January? Does it hold flavor rather than going flowery? Does the tree crop without spray? If a seedling does those things, you are not looking at an old tree. You are looking at a variety that does not have a name yet. And the loss. These get cleared as volunteers because a tree nobody planted reads as a weed that got out of hand. 4. The tree that has never been sprayed. Somewhere there is a tree that gets nothing at all. No spray, no feed, no pruning beyond a limb taken off when it fouled the shed roof. And in a wet August, when everything in the neighborhood has gone scabbed and black-spotted, that tree is carrying clean fruit. You probably read that as luck. It is not luck. Here is the thing worth understanding. Scab and canker are the reason most people give up on garden apples, and disease resistance is exactly what modern breeding programs are chasing. A tree that has shrugged those off unsprayed for 40 years in your soil, in your rainfall, has proved something under real conditions that no trial ground can promise. Heritage collections look for precisely this, because a resistant old variety is worth more to them than a fashionable one. Your test tonight, and do this one in late summer rather than spring. Look at the skin of the fruit for rough black patches, and look along the branches for sunken, cracked bark where canker has taken hold. Clean fruit and clean wood in a wet year with nothing sprayed on it is the signal. 3. And this one is not a variety at all. It is what comes off the tree in January. Your tree is not one tree. Every straight pencil-thick length of last summer's growth, cut while the tree is dormant, is a graft waiting to happen, and a graft is a whole new tree carrying identical genetics. One old apple can supply 30 sticks in an afternoon, and they travel in an envelope. That is how these varieties survived it all, hand to hand, not through nurseries. Your test. Go out in winter and count the good new shoots at the branch tips. 2. And this is the one that quietly costs the most, because the value is not in the wood. It is in what somebody still remembers. An old apple tree with a name attached is a different object from the identical tree without one. Who planted it? What year the house went up? Which nursery the family used? Or which farm the graft came from? Or the fact that everyone in that valley grew the same apple because it kept until March in a cold shed. Here is what almost nobody does in time. The person who knew is usually still alive when the garden changes hands, and nobody thinks to ask. Then they are gone, and the name goes with them, and the tree becomes a puzzle that costs money and laboratory time to solve, if anyone bothers at all. Your test tonight, and it is not a test of the tree. Find the oldest person connected to that garden and ask them one question. What did you call the apple at the bottom? Write down whatever they say, even if it is only a local name nobody else uses, even if it is only a decade in a nursery town. Local names are how identification actually happens. In 20 years, I have watched more value lost to a name nobody wrote down than to any storm. 1. And it is almost certainly a tree you already know or your parents had, or one you can picture in a garden you walked past this week. Red Delicious. Deep red, tall-shouldered, tapering to 5 little points at the base. The apple that filled every lunchbox in America for 50 years and was planted in more gardens than any other variety of the 20th century. Here is the truth that turns this whole video around. It was the most produced apple in the country for decades, and that is exactly why an old Red Delicious in your garden is worth almost nothing as a tree. Fame is not value. The thing everyone recognizes is almost never the thing worth the most, because the whole world already has one. I will not inflate it for you. If that is what is standing at the bottom of your garden, you have a nice old tree and a lot of apples, and no collector on earth is going to drive out to see it. But this is the reframe I have been walking you toward for 10 items. The value was never in the fruit, and it was never in the name that everybody knows. It was in the things underneath. Whether there is a graft collar or none at all. Whether anyone wrote down where it came from. Whether it survived 40 years without a single spray. So here is your final test. And it is the same skill every item tonight was teaching. Do not look up into the branches. Get down and clear the grass away from the bottom foot of the trunk. Because the fruit is the story the tree tells you, and the trunk is the truth. Everything worth money tonight was mossy, leaning, easy to write off as firewood, and every bit of it was decided in things most people never bend down to look at. If this made you want to go out and clear the moss off a trunk, do me one small thing and like the video. It tells me to keep making these. And if you are not subscribed, that is where the next one lives. Then tell me down in the comments. What is the oldest tree in your garden and who planted it? A parent, a grandparent, somebody who lived in the house before you? I read every one, and the story of who planted it is half the value. One last thing, and I mean it. Do not put a saw to a single old tree before you look at the base of the trunk. Number 1 is probably in your garden right now. Go and look at the graft.